My name is Nick, and I'm going to be the next school shooter of 2018. My goal is at least 20 people with an AR-15 and a couple tracer rounds. I think I can get done. Location is Stoneman Douglas in Parkland, Florida. It's going to be a big event. And when you see me on the news, you'll all know who I am.
Okay. Some voices were talking to me. You need to make a sacrifice, or we're going to come and get you. You need to do it. And I saw him. It was laying on the grass, like that. It was like just fast asleep, where he was drunk. And he goes, he's the one. Do it.
I'm not gonna lie, it felt amazing.
What does it take for a teenager to become a killer? Could it be a result of a bad home life, neglect, or abuse? Or maybe it's due to some undiagnosed mental health problem that they were struggling with. We know that sometimes this could be the result of bullying or other problems within a child, but is it possible that some people are just born evil and that's how they become killers? The terrifying teens in this video are some of the most deranged killers of all time. Let's take a look at them.
It was, says the prosecutor, the most horrific, depraved murder he ever tried. The gruesome slaying of an elderly couple. Now the young man who confessed to the killing may be getting out of prison.
On April 14th, 2013, then 15-year-old Daniel William Marsh of Davis, California, took the lives of Oliver Chip Northup and his wife, Claudia Maupin. They were an elderly couple who had no connection to David. For a long time, Daniel had been dreaming of hurting or killing someone. He was a psychopath whose dream was to become a serial killer. On the night of the murders, he quietly slipped out of his mother's home and went looking for an easy kill. He was particularly looking for an open door or window so he could get in easily. That's when he came across Chip and Claudia's house. He was able to cut through a window screen and climb into the house. He went to the couple's bedroom where he found them sleeping. He then used a knife to brutally take their lives. They each sustained more than 60 wounds. But just killing them wasn't enough for Daniel. After he was done, he also continued to use the knife to mangle the older couple's bodies. Imagine being 15 years old and being this heartless. Daniel was not smart enough not to leave any evidence at the scene of the crime. There were no handprints, no DNA, no signs that he had been there at all. It could have been a nearly perfect crime if it wasn't for one major mistake that Daniel made. He bragged to others about the killing. This made him quickly become a major suspect in the crime. He was later brought into police custody and ended up confessing to the crimes while being questioned. Listen to the haunting way he described how it felt to kill these two innocent people.
I'm not gonna lie, it felt amazing.
What's crazy about this story is that this same young man who claimed 2 innocent lives actually saved a life just years earlier and was hailed a hero for it. After Daniel's father suffered a heart attack at the wheel, he was able to resuscitate him and save his life. He was even interviewed for the local news.
I started pounding on his chest, and after about 30 seconds, he came back.
How the seemingly sweet young man from that video would become a teenage killer just years later, we may never know. The teen was reviewed for mental competency, and it was later determined that he was not insane. He was ultimately convicted for the murders in September 2014. He was sentenced to 25 years to life behind bars, but his lawyers would later file an appeal. If the appeal was accepted, he would be released far earlier than anyone expected. This was a shock to the community.
Don't be fooled by his clean-cut looks. He savagely murdered this sweet elderly couple just for kicks. Now there's outrage because he could get an early release from prison when he turns 25 next year.
The family members of the victims spoke out saying that they did not believe that Daniel should be released back into the public.
What this does is it traumatizes not only our family, but it traumatizes the whole community.
I spoke to the slain woman's daughter, Victoria, and granddaughter, Sarah. They both watched the court hearing from the offices of the district attorney.
Our fight is to keep a psychopath in prison.
Ultimately, though, the court denied the appeal, believing that Daniel is still a very serious danger to the community. So for now, at least, he will remain behind bars where he will not be able to hurt any other innocent people.
Today is the day that it all begins. The day of my massacre shall begin. All the kids in school will in fear and hide. From the wrath of my power, they will know who I am. I am nothing, I am no one. My life is nothing and meaningless. Everything that I hold dear, I let go beyond your half. Every day, I see the world ending another day.
No American could ever forget the tragedy that occurred at Marjorie Stoneman Douglas High School in Parkland, Florida, on Valentine's Day of 2018. It was supposed to be a happy day, with the students all excited about exchanging Valentine's gifts, but towards the end of the school day, things took a tragic turn. Nikolas Cruz, a former student of the school, entered the campus while heavily armed. He intended to take out as many people as possible. Here is his manifesto that he recorded ahead of time that discusses his dream of becoming famous. It is eerie listening to this, now after knowing what would happen soon.
Hello, my name is Nick, and I'm going to be the next school shooter of 2018. My goal is at least 20 people with an AR-15 and a couple tracer rounds. I think I could do a good time. Location is Stoneman Douglas in Parkland, Florida. It's going to be a big event. And when you see me on the news, you'll all know who I am.
Nick first entered a section of the school that was heavily populated. There were about 900 students attending class and around 30 teachers. He didn't hesitate to open fire immediately, trying to take out anyone who happened to be in sight. Everyone was completely caught off guard. The first to be hit were in the hallway and were unable to get to shelter on time. At the sound of gunfire, students and teachers across the school rushed to hide. Nobody knew what was going on. Things became even more confusing when the fire alarm started going off and they didn't know if they were supposed to evacuate or take cover. Nick continued his rampage across the school grounds. One by one, the 911 calls started coming in, each one sounding more desperate than the last.
911, what's your emergency?
Please help, someone else is school. A lot of blood, please help, please.
Other students texted or called their parents and siblings to tell them that they loved them and that they were sorry. They didn't know if they would ever get a second chance. Parents, feeling helpless, tried to calm down their children and give them advice to keep them safe.
Oh my God, I love you.
What?
It's the cop. I love you. I love you.
Okay, what is that? What is she saying? What is happening?
Somebody just entered the room.
Okay. Who is it that entered the room?
The police?
I love you. It's Mom. God, Lord, just Lord God.
Nick Cruz was not at all affected by the screams of terror all around him as he fired his weapon at the innocent children in school. He continued his rampage, taking life after life. He managed to make it to multiple levels of the building before blending in with the crowds of people and fleeing the building. He would later go to a nearby McDonald's where a lot of terrified students were waiting and trying to get in touch with their family members. One of these students in particular was struggling to get in contact with his sister. His name was Mike Stalker. Mike had a bad feeling that something had happened, but he didn't know that the reason he couldn't get in touch with his sister was because Nick had fired his weapon at her 11 times, and she was in critical condition. Nick slid into the booth where Mike was sitting and asked him if he could give him a ride away from the area. Mike turned him down, saying he needed to figure out where his sister was. Mike did not know what Nick had done, but luckily the other students had recognized him and reported him to law enforcement. By 4:30 p.m. that day, Nikolas Cruz was arrested and taken into custody. This is the eerie thing that he told one of the officers who handcuffed him and held him down after his arrest.
What's going on today, bro?
The demons, man.
Demons?
Voices.
Yeah, no problem.
Voices.
Voices and demons?
Where's the voices?
Once it had been determined that the threat had been removed from campus, the high school was evacuated. Eventually, students were able to reunite with their terrified parents, their reunions being captured by the nearby press. But not everyone got to enjoy the feeling of being reunited with their loved ones after the horrific day. Some parents and siblings had to wait hours, only to hear that their loved one was seriously injured and may not survive. Others were told that their loved one would never come home at all because they had been killed. In total, Nik Cruz killed 17 people and injured 17 others. Some of those who were injured would never be able to make a full recovery. Many more who were present that day suffered from long-term trauma. While family members were going through this unimaginable terror, Nik Cruz was being questioned by detectives, and he was talking about the evil voice that he claimed told him to do these horrible things.
When you're talking about demons, what are the demons?
Voices.
Well, tell me about it. What are the voices about?
It's another voice, the evil side.
Okay. And how long has that voice been going on?
Years.
Okay. When did it start, you think? When your mom passed?
It started when my mom passed.
While it certainly does not excuse the terrible things he did on February 14th, 2018, Nik had a very troubling past. His mother used illegal substances and alcohol while she was pregnant with him. He was put into an orphanage when he was born and was later adopted. Just a short time before Nik carried out the killings, his birth mother had died. While in court, his legal team would later try to use his difficult upbringing and mental problems as a defense. This was a very difficult and controversial move, as it appeared obvious to everyone affected by this tragedy that this was something that Nik had carefully planned and carried out. It wasn't something that he had just done on a whim one day. Throughout the lengthy and very painful trial, many different people who were present the day of the tragedy were called forward to testify. This included both students and teachers.
We were shielding ourselves with our backpacks, and we had a clear view of the door, and we noticed that the door wasn't closed. It was wide open.
The door of the classroom to your door?
Yes.
As she and the rest of her classmates cowered in terror, they realized that their teacher, Mr. Beigel, had been hit. He wasn't moving.
Our teacher, Beagle, his body was partially inside of the classroom, and then his torso down was outside of the classroom. And his body was blocking the door and holding it open. So it was very scary for us because we didn't know what to do.
This was just one of the horrible stories retold during the trial. Most of the victims' family members attended court each day. Though it was very painful, they wanted to hear exactly what happened to their loved ones. Nikolas Cruz would eventually be convicted of 17 counts of murder and 17 counts of attempted murder. Prior to sentencing, family members would get a chance to speak out about how this tragedy affected them. Listen to the heartbreaking statement from a young man who lost his father during the tragedy.
Is there something that you'd like to tell the jury about your dad?
Yeah.
What is that?
It's okay. I missed him.
Judge Elizabeth Scherer would ultimately sentence Nik Cruz to 34 consecutive life sentences with no possibility of parole. That is a life sentence for each of the people he killed and each of the people he injured. In 2015, Greg Ramos, who was just 15 years old when he brutally killed his own mother. All of this happened because they got into an argument about him getting a bad grade.
Police say Greg Ramos and his mother got into a terrible argument when he came home with a D in school. Around midnight, he allegedly sneaked into his mom's room and strangled her. Then he went to get a wheelbarrow to bring the body out of the house. When he returned, he discovered she was still alive.
When Greg realized his first attempt to kill his mother hadn't worked, he tried again. He was eventually successful after it took him half an hour to complete the task. When law enforcement arrived at the scene, Greg pretended to be a scared little boy. He said that he believed that his home had been robbed and his mother had been killed in the process.
The video shows Ramos even taking deputies on a tour of the house, listing all of the things he claimed had been stolen.
I had a radio here, and I had an extension cord with an alarm clock, and then I had my $1,000 computer here.
Most kids who just found out their mother died would be showing some sort of emotion, but not Greg. He wasn't very emotional about it at all. He used some expletives and said, "I'll tell you what happened." Very cold, calculated, and very proud of what he did. But it didn't take long for the detectives to believe that he may not be as innocent as he was pretending to be. There were holes in Greg's story, including things that didn't add up about what he had been doing the day his mom was killed. He eventually confessed to killing her in cold blood for really no reason at all. He was sentenced to 45 years in prison.
You have destroyed not only my life, or his life, you destroyed mine and my family, and his family, and his kids. And yet you still have not even said you're sorry for what you have done. You have savaged no remorse whatsoever. My heart breaks and aches every single day since his life has been taken from him.
In 2017, Kyle Anger and a group of other teenage boys thought it would be fun to throw rocks off an overpass, causing them to land on cars that were driving down below. The boys were old enough to understand that what they were doing was extremely dangerous, but they did it anyway. One of the rocks they threw ultimately went through the windshield of a 32-year-old man named Kenneth White and killed him. The teens realized what they had done and quickly fled the scene. They later exchanged text messages talking about how seriously they had messed up, saying, "No one saw us. If everyone shuts up, we won't get caught." But someone did recognize the vehicle that the teens had been driving that day, and one by one, each teen was arrested and charged in connection with the murder. It was determined that Kyle had been the ringleader, and he was charged with second-degree murder. Kyle pled guilty and was sentenced to 39 months in prison. He was released in 2021.
It should have been a normal day in the middle of the afternoon. And make no mistake, they didn't happen to Philip Chisum. He did these terrible things to Colleen Ritzer, and she was only 24 years old. And the only still image that matters in this case is the image of Colleen in the woods.
Colleen Ritzer was a very young, caring, and well-loved teacher who taught math at Denver High School. She truly wanted her students to learn and to perform to the best of their abilities. In fact, she cared so much that sometimes she would even stay late after school for extra tutoring. That is what she was doing on October 2nd, 2013, when her life was brutally stolen from her. On that afternoon, she briefly left her classroom to use the restroom. She didn't realize that one of her students, 14-year-old Philip Chisum, had followed her. Philip brutally attacked Colleen using a box cutter. He then retrieved a trash bin and used it to wheel her body out of the school. At the time, nobody suspected a thing. Colleen was still barely alive when he took her to a wooded area, undressed her, and horrifically maimed her body before leaving the scene. When neither Colleen nor Philip returned to their homes that evening, an investigation quickly began, with Philip being a person of interest. He was found wandering along the side of a road later that day and was detained by law enforcement. When they looked inside his bag, they found several of Colleen's belongings, including a pair of her underwear and a red-stained box cutter. He was arrested and charged with her murder. Tragically, Colleen's abused body would also be found partially undressed in the woods that day. The trial must have been excruciating for Colleen's loved ones to go through. The prosecution did not hold back when describing the terrible things she had to go through leading up to her death. By looking at her pair of red-covered jeans, you can imagine just how horrific those last moments were and how much pain she went through. Philip was tried as an adult and convicted of Colleen's murder. At sentencing, Colleen's parents did not hold back when describing their hatred for their daughter's killer.
Her killer knew exactly what he was doing and has never shown remorse. I hate Colleen's killer and will never forgive him.
Today, the good must prevail over the evil. You need to remember that Colleen matters.
This story was so horrific that even the judge seemed shocked. He acknowledged that this is probably one of the most painful experiences that any family should ever have to endure.
When something terrible happens, people will often say it could always be worse. It is difficult for this court to imagine what could be worse for an individual or a family to endure than the brutal and senseless murder of Colleen Ritzer. Colleen Ritzer lived a life of quiet heroism. That's what most teachers do.
The judge had no mercy on Philip and gave him the harshest sentence possible under the law, considering he was a minor.
for the period of not less than 40 years.
Philip Chisum will serve 40 years in prison before he gets a chance for parole. His mother broke down in tears on hearing it.
So you put the clothes in the attic, you put the knives in the shed. What else do you do?
Live with guilt till I get caught.
Craig Price is an American serial killer from Rhode Island who committed his crimes between the ages of 13 and 15 years old. His first murder occurred on July 27, 1987, when he was just 13 years old. He crept into a house just 2 doors down from his house. Inside, he found a 27-year-old woman named Rebecca Spencer. He grabbed a knife from the woman's kitchen and used it to take her life. More than 2 years went by after that before Craig decided to take another life. This time, he was a freshman in high school and 15 years old. At that time, Craig was under the influence of illegal substances. He targeted yet another neighbor's house. This home belonged to the Heaton family. Once again, Craig's weapon of choice was a knife, but this time there was not just one victim. There were 3, and 2 of them were children.
Craig, I want you in your own words at this time to tell me as clearly and as best you can what occurred there.
Price told detectives he snuck through an open window in the Heaton's home in the dead of night. At the time, he claims he was there looking to steal a VCR, but detectives didn't buy it.
Craig's first victim was the mother of the home, 39-year-old Joan Heaton. After he was finished with Joan, Craig moved on to her 10-year-old daughter, Jennifer. He did the same thing to Jennifer that he did to her mother, but he struck her 62 times. The last victim was little Melissa, who was just 7 years old. Craig, who already had a record for petty crime, was suspected as the killer just a month before he turned 16 years old. After he was arrested, he confessed to all of the murders. Law enforcement would later say that he never showed any remorse and appeared cold and emotionless when describing how the murders took place. Listen as he describes one of the Heaton victims running for her life as he tried to attack her.
Say anything. She was just like trying to, like, as soon as she seen me, like run the other way, break the other way. And I grabbed her.
Craig was convicted when he was still a minor, which was a very important detail. Because of his age by law, he could expect to be released from prison by his 21st birthday. Knowing that his time behind bars would likely be pretty short seemed to make Craig all the more arrogant. While in prison, he bragged about how he was going to make a name for himself when he was a free man again. But ultimately, Craig's arrogance was about to cost him in a really major way. He ended up getting into a lot of trouble behind bars. He faced a slew of other charges, including extortion and assault and violation of probation. He even attacked a prison officer. Throughout his imprisonment, he has constantly gotten into fights. As of November 2023, Craig is 50 years old and still imprisoned at the Union Correctional Institution in Florida. Will he ever be a free man again, or will he spend the rest of his life in prison? Only time will tell.
Welcome back to our YouTube channel. Day 3 after murdering somebody.
Whoa! Don't put that on the camera.
In April 2021, 16-year-old Sierra Halth and her 20-year-old boyfriend, Aaron Guerrero, brutally killed Sierra's father, 45-year-old Daniel Halth. Daniel had disapproved of his daughter's relationship with Aaron, not only because of the age difference, but because they had spoken of wanting to run away together. After the murder, Sierra and Aaron attempted to set the house on fire, robbed Daniel, and then fled the scene. They were detained 4 days later in Salt Lake City and were eventually charged in connection with Daniel's murder. As a part of her defense, Sierra tried to say that her father had been hurting her and forcing her to drink alcohol underage, but family members said this was a total lie. She would soon be convicted.
On count 4, you're going to be sentenced to 19 to 48 months in the Nevada Department of Corrections. That's ordered to run concurrent to count 3. On count 5, you're going to be sentenced to 19 to 48 months in the Nevada Department of Corrections. That's ordered to run concurrent to count 4.
In total, Sierra was sentenced to a whopping 148 years behind bars. But because she was a minor at the time the crime was committed, she will likely have a chance to be eligible for parole after 22 years, if she is well behaved.
My voices were talking to me. You need to make a sacrifice, or we're going to come and get you. You need to do it.
And I saw him. It was laying on the grass, kind of like that. It was like just fast asleep, where he was drunk. And he goes, he's the one. Do it.
James Fairweather of Essex was just 15 years old when he said voices in his head caused him to take the lives of 2 people. He was not arrested until a year later. Listen to him descriptively explain to the detectives how he used a knife to brutally take out one of his victims.
So I went up to him. Can I stand up? No.
Yes.
Went up to him. Stood over like that. Not helping that. So I stabbed him first there. And I've done it a few times. While I was doing that, my voices were laughing louder and louder.
James was convicted at the age of 17 and sentenced to life in prison with a minimum of 27 years before he could be eligible for parole.
I'm sorry for what happened, Your Honor, but I need to life in prison. And I'm not a bad person, but I made mistakes. But I'm not just some gangbanger that she tried to portray me as.
This is a controversial story, as many people don't believe that the subject is truly a cold-hearted killer. It all began at a Halloween party in 2012 near the University of Southern California campus. While the details are not totally clear, it was reported that an argument broke out between a young man named Brandon Spencer and a rival gang. A violent scuffle followed, and it ended with 4 people getting hurt. Luckily, nobody was killed. While many believe there was not enough evidence to connect him to the violence that took place, Brandon ended up having to take the blame for the ordeal. He was convicted of 4 counts of attempted murder and sentenced to 40 years to life behind bars. His heartbroken father later spoke out on his behalf, talking about the injustice that he believes took place.
Show me the proof that this kid is a notorious gang member. My son's getting 40 years to life, and they got different descriptions of what took place.
But Brandon's father is not the only one who thinks the teen was innocent. As time went on, many members of the community began to think so as well.
I took a step back and actually looked at the situation, and I felt like although he came there with those intentions, I don't think he was deserving of 40 years to life. That's completely wrong, especially since he doesn't even get an opportunity to learn from the situation.
There have been several petitions that were started in hopes of getting Brandon a new and more fair trial. But as of November 2023, he remains behind bars. Most typical teenagers spend their days thinking about pretty typical things. Maybe they're worried about passing their next algebra test or trying to decide who they're gonna ask to the next school dance. Most teenagers don't spend their spare time thinking about murder. How did these turns turn out this way? We may never know. Thanks for watching, and don't forget to like and subscribe for more.